everybody, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, welcome back to Raising A to Z. My name is Amanda. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom. I am right in the middle of a fantastic 4-part series on how to start homeschooling. So last week I did a video all on the things you need to know before you get started and you need to consider before you decide to homeschool. Today I'm doing the getting started video. So this is going to be all about the things that you need to do once you've made the decision to homeschool. So if you have finally decided to pull the trigger, you are going to start homeschooling, this is the video for you. These are all the things that you need to think about and do to actually get started homeschooling. Before I jump into that, why don't you guys subscribe and click the bell to get notifications so you'll know when the next video comes out in the series, because like I said, this is going to be a 4-part video and this is only video 2. You've decided, you've made the decision, you are going to pull the trigger and you are going to homeschool your kids. First off, congratulations. Secondly, what are you going to do? What do you actually need to do? First thing you need to do is unenroll your kids. This kind of goes with the second thing you need to do, which is figuring out what your local requirements are. So every area has different requirements. Every area has different things. And by area, I mean your province or your territory or your state. Local, like city districts, don't have any input in it. It is on a bigger scale than that. So you need to figure out what your provincial requirements are, what your state requirements are, territory requirements are. What do you need to do specific to your area? The first thing is, how do you actually unenroll your kids? And it's quite easy. You just need to like Google how do you do it. For example, in Ontario, it is super easy. If you are in Ontario like me, and your kids are currently in public school, you just need to send a letter of intent. I will put a link down to a sample letter below to your school board superintendent. That's it. A lot of people send one to the principal as something polite to do. Even that's not required though. And so that's all you have to do. You just have to send a letter to your school board that states your kids, their names, their age, their grade, what school they're going to currently, and that you are going to disenroll them for the purposes of homeschooling. That's it. I will let you know that right now, especially because of the pandemic, a lot of school boards are kind of freaking out that they've had a large amount of disenrollments. They might send you a package saying that you need to fill out this package of like, what's your plans, what are you using, what's your supports, like all kinds of stuff. You don't need to fill any of that out. It is not required. They might actually ask you if you want to enroll in something like online learning or asynchronous learning where they send you packets of work. You don't need to agree to any of that either. They're just trying to retain students in their programs right now. So that's all you have to do in Ontario. You just have to send a letter to your school board superintendent and you're done. And then, like I said, part 2 is knowing what your actual area requirements are. So some things that you might be required to do as homeschoolers, you might be required to keep lesson plans. You might be required to submit an annual plan of like what you're going to do over the year. Your kids might have testing. They have to go to a testing center and have their testing done. Those are all things that you might have to do, or you might live in an area like I do in Ontario where you have 0 requirements. No record keeping, no requirements. You are basically free as a bird. Like I said, it varies dramatically. Some areas like Quebec have very, very strict and very, very numerous requirements to homeschool your kids. And then, like I said, right next door in Ontario, we have nothing. So you'll definitely want to look into what are your local requirements for your state or your province. Very important. The third thing you're gonna wanna do once you've figured out what you need to do, what your requirements are going to be. You've disenrolled your kids. Great. Now you need to deschool. This is a step that everyone forgets. This is a step that everyone skips over and they jump right into homeschooling, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they're pulling their hair out going, why is this not working? You didn't deschool. Deschooling is a process where you are going to take some time to not do any academics. You're going to take time to find your kids' natural rhythms. You're going to take time to reconnect as a family. You're going to take time to just live life for a little bit. And you're going to take time to unlearn everything you guys have learned about the school system. So you're going to unlearn that, you know, kids have to be at their desks all the time. You're going to unlearn that you need to spend so many hours a day. You're going to unlearn what learning looks like. And for some kids, that takes a little bit longer than others. For some parents, it takes a little bit longer than others. But basically, it's a time of no academics. If you need more information on why you need to deschool, or you want more like what does it look like, I will put a link up here on a video I did all about deschooling. It's a fantastic video if you need to deschool and that is something that you're struggling with. Definitely check that video out. The next thing you need to do, and this is for you as a parent, you need to decide, why are you homeschooling? And I always say this is something that you need to do. You need to figure out why you're homeschooling before you start homeschooling. But you also need to figure out why you're homeschooling once you are homeschooling. Like, what are you hoping to get out of homeschooling? Why are you not wanting to send your kids to public school? Why are you homeschooling? And I like to keep my whys in my phone, because they really do help me on a bad day when I'm like, man, oh man, it would be so much easier for me if I sent them to public school. Because we have those days. Trust me, there are those days that happen. And you know, it's the days where everyone's fighting and screaming, you didn't get anything done, there's tears, and you're just like, man, if they were at school right now, I wouldn't have to listen to this. And it's true. But there's a lot of reasons why I do homeschool my kids. And those reasons definitely outweigh the bad days. And so I like to keep, like I said, I keep my whys on my phone. And that way when I'm having a really, really bad day, I can go through and look at them and be like, yeah, I homeschool my kids because of A, B, C, and D. And 95% of the time, I see that. I see the results of that in my homeschooling and in my family. I just don't see it today. Today is just a bad day. And it's a little reminder, and it really does help. Number 5, once you have started homeschooling, you've deschooled a little bit, you've thought about your why, which is a great thing to do while you're deschooling. Now it's time to start thinking about like approaches. What is your approach going to be? Now, you don't need to decide on your approach. First off, there's like a dozen different approaches to homeschooling, different philosophies and ideas behind education. You don't need to decide on them right now. But it is a good idea to start looking at what they are, why they have their different philosophies, different things that they each value, and it's a great idea to start doing that now. Some of them you're going to toss out because it just doesn't fit with your personality, it doesn't fit with what you value. That's fine. Some of them you're going to be really drawn to and you're like, man, I really love this, and you can kind of learn more about that and do some more research and read about it and find maybe some homeschool groups online that are about a particular style. For example, there are a lot of like unschooling groups or Charlotte Mason groups or classical groups, which are some of the different approaches. They're great. You might be drawn to a certain approach. That's fantastic. You might realize that like you're a little bit like me and you kind of like a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, and you're a little bit on the eclectic side. And just having kind of an idea of different approaches kind of gives you some ideas of things you might want to borrow or things you really like, and you kind of build your own style going that way. I do like to tell parents that pretty much no one is 100% one approach, except for maybe if you're going unschooling road. Like I said, I tend to be eclectic, and so that is my homeschooling approach, and I like to beg, borrow, and steal. And so I do a little bit of unit studies, I do a little Charlotte Mason, I do a little bit of unschooling, and I've kind of created a style that's all my own. You might end up doing something like that, or you might be like, man, I am really a classical homeschooler. And I know people who are very hardcore classical homeschoolers. There's nothing wrong with that. It just helps you decide on curriculum, on approach, on timelines, on expectations, and that's great. So just start thinking about what your approaches might be. Number 6 is start looking at curriculum. Curriculum can be very overwhelming. It is very overwhelming for me, and I've been homeschooling for 4 years. And I pretty much use the same curriculum every year. And when it comes time to order my curriculum, I still spend like 4 days making that decision and researching and trying to figure it out. And I end up going with the same stuff I've been using for the last 4 years. Curriculum can be overwhelming. If you're trying to start homeschooling kind of the mid-year or end of the year, a lot of people recommend going with what I like to call beginner homeschool curriculum. So these are gonna be like the workbooks you find at Costco or Walmart, Brain Quest, or complete Canadian curriculum for whatever grade it is. Those I have a whole video on those. I'll put the link up here. They're great if you're getting started. They do cover everything that is being covered in the curriculum for the most part. So that is kind of the nice thing, is if you have no idea where to start, they're very inexpensive, they're easy to find, they do cover everything topic wise, and they're also very easy to supplement. They're not super in depth, they don't really teach much of like why or the how or much practice for a lot of things, but they do kind of cover everything. So that's kind of a nice place if you're really starting and you're like, for example, if you're doing an emergency pull, if you're deciding like middle of February, there's too much bullying, my kid just can't take it, my kid is sick, we're moving, like whatever it is, and it's like just all of a sudden you need to pull your kids out today, they're a great option because you can just kind of like pick up and just keep going. And they're very self-directed. You can kind of just plow through, right? But if you're going long term, you're probably going to want to switch to something a little more robust with a little bit more teaching elements and teaching emphasis rather than just like, here's the page, do this kind of thing. But it does fill the cracks. It does fill the gap of like, I need something today or I need something like right now. It gives you time to research, time to figure out other things in your life. So they're great. I do recommend if you are looking at curriculum and you want to do something more than those kinds of things, especially your first like 6 months, keep your curriculum to a minimum. I recommend, unless you're doing like I said, the Brain Quest kind of book or the Complete Canadian curriculum, if you're looking at buying like a lot of curriculum, because I know some people are like, oh, we're going to get, you know, a math and a science and an English and a writing and a spelling and a grammar and a social studies and a religion and a... Start small. Like pick 1 or 2 and work from there, because there are so many free resources online that you can like pull and supplement as you need to, that until you figure out what your style is, till you figure out how your kids are learning, till you figure out what they really like, what they struggle with, where their strengths and weaknesses are, it's a great way to just keep it to a minimum. Trust me, it'll save you a lot of money and a lot of stress and a lot of heartache. Just keep it to the minimum. And like I said, you can always supplement. There are fantastic unit studies out there, fantastic novel studies that you can find literally just like on Pinterest, Googling free unit studies. Like so many amazing unit studies out there, and you just like print them off at home. Start with a little bit. You can always add as you feel more comfortable and as you see where you actually need curriculum. That leads into my next point, which is number 7. Start slowly. There is no reason why you need to like wake up today and be like, okay, we are doing 5 subjects today. Take a week or 2 and do 1. I often recommend language. So start with like spelling and reading, because kids often like to listen to a story, and spelling is kind of like do a little bit and then you're moving on. Start slow. Do that for a week or 2. Then add another subject. Maybe you're going to add in math, and now you're doing like language and math. Do that for a couple weeks. Then you can add in another subject, maybe a science or a unit study or something. Just take your time, ease into it, because especially if you're coming from the public school, there's a lot of confusion for kids of like they're figuring out their deschooling. Then you also have some kids have a lot of trauma about the school system, about how they've been made to feel unintelligent because they are just not great at certain subjects. Some kids have a lot of struggle with times, especially if they have any kind of neurodiversity. There can be a lot of like stress and tension about doing lots of schoolwork. Start slow, build into it, and then you can also see like what your flow is going to be as a homeschool family. I know my kids kind of like whip through math. They whip through math. They both love it and they whip through it. Language, they tend to be a little slower. They tend to be a little more methodical about it. That's okay, but start slow. Give yourself a little bit of time to adjust, give the kids some time to adjust, and you'll just find you'll have a much better like integration into your subjects. If you're finding that you are still having a lot of like, if that's not your thing either, you're like, man, I got to do more. Start with something that's maybe like a bigger project. Instead of doing like individual subjects, start with something like a unit study, a big project, a passion project, something like that to kind of kickstart learning. But it has to be something kids are super interested in. That's key. Pick something that they're super interested in, learn everything about it. Kind of go on that kind of like a deep dive. That's another great way to like introduce kind of like a learning time or a school time back into your day after you've done some deschooling, is picking something they're really interested in and slowly using that as like a transition into a learning time. So yeah, start slow. And lastly, I say this to everybody, get your kids' input. Ask them, what do you want to learn? What do you like to learn? What are you interested in? What kind of books do you like? What subjects are you good at? What subjects do you have a hard time with? Like, ask them. First off, kids are incredibly intuitive. They know what they're good at. They know what they're not good at. They also know what they like and what they don't like. Now, if your kids don't like math, that doesn't mean you don't do math. But if they don't like math, it could be because they struggle at math. So maybe you're like, okay, we're gonna take a step back. We're gonna go back to when it was easier, and we're gonna try to relearn, and maybe you missed some things. Maybe the teacher missed some things along the way, or you just didn't catch it. And that's why it's so hard. So let's go back and we can learn that way. But also there's gonna be things where your kids are like, man, I really don't like this. Like, I really don't enjoy learning about, okay, for example, Alexi's really not a huge fan of learning about animals. It's just not her thing. She's just not really into learning about animals for an extended period of time. She's happy to read like a book here and there about an animal, but in terms of like sitting down and doing a unit study on an animal or even animals in general, it's a little bit of a stretch for her. It's just not her thing. That's okay. Definitely ask your kids what they like, what they don't like, and maybe it's just that they're not ready for it. That could also be a huge thing too. And you'd be really surprised. Like, I always ask my kids when I start planning for my next school year, which will probably be like March, April, I start thinking about like the next year. My kids, I ask them, what do you want to learn about next year? The answers they come up with are surprising and they're fantastic. When I was planning this year, Zoe, who is 4, came up with oceans, butterflies, dogs, and dinosaurs. That's what she wanted to learn about. So that's what we're learning about. Alexi asked her, what do you want to learn about? Alexi came up with mythical creatures, fairy tales, famous women, and she had one more. Oh, the weather. Like, just out of the blue, that's what she and literally, what do you want to learn about? That's what I want to learn about. All right, and so we've done a famous women's unit study, and both my kids thought it was fantastic. We read so many books and biographies about women who are famous for different things. Amazing. They loved it. I probably wouldn't have done that because in my head, 4 and 6-year-olds are not really interested in history and famous women and biographies because who's interested in that? Apparently my kids, because we did that for a month and they were upset when I ran out of biographies. So yeah, ask your kids. You might be really surprised and it might be like the best deep dive you ever go into. So I always like to say, ask them. What's the harm? You're like, oh, that's a ridiculous idea. We're not doing it. Never know. We did a whole unit study on dogs. Let me tell you, my kids absolutely loved it. You never know how things are gonna go. And if they like it and they're interested in it, you might as well learn about it, right? That's my advice for getting started. That's how I think you should get started. You wanna stick around next week for when I start talking about finding your groove. When you're starting to you're not in your first month or 2 anymore. How do you keep going for the next 6 months? That's what we're going to talk about next week. Thank you so much for watching. Like I said, you want to subscribe and click the bell so you get the notifications for that part 3. And if you want to see what we're doing on a regular basis, you can definitely follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.